The top portrait prize went to a very striking and very moving image of an Afghan woman whose nose had been cut off and whose ears had been cut off by her husband. And that was the clear, from my point of view, the clear number one image of the portrait series. The number 2 and 3 were a very sort of also dignified and very straightforward portrait of a young Russian sailor who looks almost stylized, very kind of white on white, almost a very formal portrait of him looking directly at the camera, which contrasted really nicely with the other choice, which was again a very dignified Dinka tribesman in Africa, standing almost like with a staff next to him in front of a hut in the countryside. In many categories we ended up having color and black and white, and I think that was important to a lot of us to have that kind of the combination to sort of represent various ways of making photography, traditional and contemporary, and in fact most of these are fairly formal and traditional portraits, but of subjects that are not always seen, and seen, I think, in a very elegant and dignified way. The first portrait story went to a really unusual and beautifully staged group of images from the Sahara of single people in very dramatically lit settings, often with beautiful skies or a kind of moon above them, but taken at night with very directed light on the subjects, really sort of cinematic and very carefully staged, clearly. And the other series was very different, of people at an Irish fairground. I think one of the things that really drew the jury to them was their personalities. I think the photographer really got into them individually and allowed them to kind of be themselves in a really charming way. Well, I was very conscious, as I said before, of representing my fellow jurors who had very strong feelings about the work, and especially I remember before we separated, they wanted to make sure that I understood their top 10 pictures. And both of them were very, very interested in this group of cell phone images. I'm very glad in the end that was one of the stories that people also responded to, and in exactly the same way, that they felt it was a very modern story. It really reflected a very contemporary moment, probably something that in 2 years will seem almost antique. I'm sure there will be whole other ways of people projecting themselves out into the world, but it felt really, really interesting for this moment. So I was very conscious of trying to convey the whole jury's feelings, especially at the very beginning of the discussions. But a lot of the things that we felt very strongly about fell by the wayside along the way, as always happens. Still, the picture that won the number one single and ended up winning the World Press Photo of the Year was the photo that we felt most strongly about.